Welcome to the Alternate History and Secret History panel. I'm going to kick off the panel by asking each of our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit briefly about their alternate and secret history experience. And I'll start with Lawrence.
Starting on the right side. As a lot of you know, and I already introduced myself in the previous one, but Lawrence Railey, I do a lot of different things, DJing, which is completely irrelevant to this conversation, a bunch of other stuff. What's relevant to this conversation is the Cyber Byzantium, or Spirits in the Silicon, as we're calling it, series of novels, the first of which should have been being sold here, but it hasn't shipped in from Amazon yet, so, unfortunately.
More sabotage.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm sure it was, something like that. That's my big thing in terms of alternate history and secret history. I study a lot of Byzantine history, and I almost regard studying that as almost a secret history in itself. When I was a kid, I'm like, here's this thing that nobody researches, nobody knows about. I want to know all about this thing. So.
I'm Frederick Garrow Himebaugh. My first two novels were what I would call gonzo alternate history, in that they're really satire. But the first one, The Devil's Dictum, we have a United States which was founded by Satan-worshipping pirates. And the second one, Ronald Reagan's Brilliant Bullet, President Reagan battles Soviet missiles in a jetpack.
No, I don't have anything.
I'm Eric M. Hamilton, and I've written a series of books that I always have a hard time encapsulating, and so I've come down to weird alternate history around U.S. presidents. And I guess if we're going to be talking about secret history, they're all technically secret history books, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But I'm kind of on that edge too. Like it's books that involve time travel or ghosts or other kinds of things as well. It just playing with history is kind of what I do.
So, most of you probably know who I am by now. My name is Robert Kroese. I am founder of BaseCon, and I've written 35 novels. I started writing basically humorous stuff, and I still do a fair amount of that. I go back and forth, and I keep telling people there's a reason my website is badnovelist.com, which is that I can't stick to a genre. I like to keep doing new things. It's all kind of within the sci-fi fantasy realm. But I lose, 70% of my readers every time I switch to a different genre, because you're not supposed to do that, because people tend to stick to a genre. And anyway, one of the things I do is dabble in mostly secret history, sort of alternate history, but I don't know that I've actually done any real alternate history. It's all pretty much been secret history stuff, and we'll get into what that means, I guess.
And I'm the moderator, Schantz. I am the author of The Hidden Truth, techno-thriller, alternate history, conspiracy series. Mine are kind of a combination. They're secret history up until the point where the timelines diverge, and then they become alternate history. So I kind of have a blend of the two. What I'd like to do to try to keep things fast-paced is I want to run through a few questions, just have someone give us a good answer. I don't think it'll be controversial, but then if someone wants to argue or have a countervailing opinion, speak up. First, can someone define alternate history versus secret history and explain the difference between the two? Someone want to take that one?
I guess I'll take it.
Okay.
I look at alternate history as having a divergence point in the past. So, for example, in the Cyber Byzantium, series that I'm working on, the point of departure, as they call it, is the Battle of Yarmouk, which was a crushing defeat for the Byzantines in 636 in our timeline. But in the timeline of this novel, it is a really bloody draw, and there is no clear winner. As a result, Islam has a much harder time conquering large swaths of territory and moves much slower. And then eventually that leads to a Byzantine Empire that survives and gets all cyberpunk. And then secret history is more like something, at least in my opinion, and Hans, this is more your area of expertise anyway, but is more like something that could be plausible in our existing timeline. It's just nobody knows about it. No, it hasn't been discovered yet. It's like you can write it in. Nothing's changed in terms of our timeline, but there's this whole parallel thing going on. Like Assassin's Creed almost has a secret history vibe to it, for example.
Anyone have anything else on that they want to offer?
I'd love to follow up with a quote from Winston Churchill, famous alternate history author. In our timeline, apparently, we are learning he's also history's greatest monster, but that's not the topic of this panel. He was talking about King Alexander of Greece, who died in 1920. His pet monkey bit him, and then he became infected and he died. And his successor changed the policies of the nation. 4 years later, Greece was involved in a war with Turkey, and 250,000 people died. And Winston Churchill said, "It is perhaps no exaggeration to remark that 250,000 persons died of this monkey's bite." I think the two things that are going on here is, first of all, the butterfly effect, which is aspect. I think a lot of alternate history authors like to pick the smallest change that will produce the smallest, alteration that will produce the biggest effect. The other thing is, if you go online and research this quote, you'll find out that there are a lot of people who say, no, you know what? That war was inevitable. It didn't matter who was king of Greece. Actually, that monkey's bite didn't kill this war. So the second aspect of alternate history is the environment that it creates for unending argument that can never be solved, right? And so I think those are the two things that make this genre charming.
It makes it very hard to do experimental history when you don't have a control history to compare the effects to. Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, something that Fred said that it might go along with something that we're going to talk about later, so I'll just talk about it now, is alternate history, and sometimes this is its strength, or sometimes it's a weakness, is the only history that we're dealing with is the history that we are living. And so even though there are these like points of divergence that you can write about, we seem to be compelled, or a lot of writers, a lot of books seem to be compelled to at least still kind of follow history. And it's just almost like a different tune or something. And like you said about Winston Churchill and that example, the war was inevitable. So, somebody can play around with that idea of the monkey bite causing a war, but we're also only dealing with the history that we have. And so a lot of times alternate histories end up just being kind of, just a play on actual history. You actually don't diverge too much.
Right,
Or
because
people
because
rebel.
otherwise it isn't history at all. I mean, if it becomes unrecognizable, then it's something else. It's like you're not even dealing with history anymore, and that's something that Hans and I have been kind of talking about, collaborating on something, and whether it's going to be an alternate history or a secret history, and I think that's part of the game. If you want to call it that, with the secret history, is how far can you push things, and have them still have the historical record still be the same, but behind the scenes we know what really happened, and it turns out what really happened is that there was these time travelers who crash landed in Norway in the Middle Ages, and then they taught Vikings over a period of 50, 60 years how to build a spaceship, and they got into space. So this is that's the plot of my my Iron Dragon series, and it's still technically a secret history, even though it's just completely diverges from our history, but it all happens in a way that there's no record of any of this happening. So it's this crazy, absolutely bizarre Vikings in space story, and it's done straight. This is not one of my humorous books. This is just it's Vikings in space, and people really liked it. It turned out really well, but I pushed it really, really far, and I had to resort to things like volcanoes and islands disappearing, which that actually did happen, like islands in the Caribbean that just vanished, in order to basically hide the tracks of what I was doing, so that there's no record of any of this.
Well, that brings us to the next question I wanted to ask, which is to explain the conventions of the genre. What do you have to be in your story to be an alternate history versus a secret history? When you cross the line, and when you're out of the genre altogether?
I think rigor is really important to some fans, particularly the ones who want to argue. So you better do your research if you're going to make them happy. As I was saying, my novels are really satire. They're gonzo alternate history. So in The Devil's Dictum, the point of divergence, is that the word?
I use point of departure, but
Departure,
point of,
yeah.
of divergence
POD.
is probably fine too.
Is 1620. The Pilgrims arrive at Plymouth Rock and they're chased away by these pirates. They end up in Haiti. So Haiti becomes this technologically advanced federal republic, and the United States becomes this satanic hellhole, basically.
So you just flip flop the United States and Haiti, more or less.
Those are your words, not mine. But somehow the action takes place in 1940. Somehow Tip O'Neill was still-born, was nevertheless born. He wasn't stillborn. You've got Richard Nixon,
Wouldn't be much point of including him in the story.
Yeah.
Warren G. Harding, and Calvin Coolidge, a form of detective agency in my novel. This makes no sense whatsoever. And somebody gave me a very positive review, and then the replies were like, that would never happen. I'm not going to read this. And I go, I know that would never happen.
But that sort of gets back to what Eric was saying, was that you end up kind of looping back to our history anyway. So
Yeah,
you do this
right.
crazy divergence, but then it's like, oh, but a lot of things turn out the same, because that's the fun of it. Because if there's no comparison between what, if you don't recognize our history and the contrasts, and that's sort of what Hans and I are or maybe I'm struggling with it. I want to do I want to do an alien invasion story that's set in the past, because it's something that hasn't been done a lot, and I'm torn between doing like War of the Worlds, 300 years ago, or having it be, just like more of a secret history where it's like, there's the alien invasion, but they've invaded they've infiltrated the government, and they're involved in Hans having much more knowledge on the subject of the history and the technology, has a lot of crazy ideas how they could be involved with the Habsburgs and
Rob, you better hurry, because you just gave me an idea. The
Yeah,
entire
that's the-
outline.
that's
just
the
flashed
risk.
before
Your
my
mouth shut,
eyes.
Rob. No
I
more.
know.
I did want to
shouldn't talk about it until like we're further along. But if somebody wants to try to do this, we could start a whole genre of like alien historical
Habsburg history.
Oh, yeah,
Habsburg alien lizard people.
We have a
Hey,
question.
that works.
Question?
still got some of the things that they make mention car sales and people ate them alive. So you make something like, hey, and others are like, you can't do that. So my question basically is, you guys, when you change certain historical characters, where's the point you guys do that to make it rational, not just to don't blame?
I might take part of that, because I'm not disagreeing, but I'm going to throw a different perspective on kind of where that cyberpunk Byzantium is coming from. That history is very different. It doesn't have the, like, past the point of departure plus about 100 years, it doesn't have any of the same people. It's completely different. Now, a lot of traditions are vaguely similar because they come from similar origins. Like, France is still around because there was a Frankish kingdom at the time that this happened, and there's still a vaguely French thing, and they still suck. So, and there are still Vikings. Only the Vikings discover North America, and right around the same time they do in our timeline ish. But they don't just hang around in Newfoundland in one little colony. They colonize half of North America, and they do things completely different. And none of the names are the same. None of the people are the same. And in fact, that was actually the difficulty in writing this novel. Travis and I had to sit for 6 months and brainstorm the complete history from 636 to 1754, which is when you have the cyberpunk Byzantine Empire actually there. The technology comes a little quicker in this environment. And even then, to your point, it's very different. For example, the Vikings are mercenaries that are like elite special forces soldiers almost, and they're very fond of airships. They like to drop silently in from their airships and basically fuck you up. So like lighter than air aircraft are used all over the place because it's considered cheap hauling capacity. So very different than our timeline. There was no, a Zeppelin explosion and all of that. So people love this stuff. So it's a very different history, and you can totally do that. And I think, to your point, there are shades between a secret history where everything is the same. Then there's kind of like a modest departure where it's still like 75% similar. It still rhymes. And then there's like kind of what I'm doing, which is it's pretty far. Like we've taken the alternate history divergence pretty far out.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that you're kind of describing is different people like to play with different aspects of history. And so some people it's the technological advance and how nations maybe change or something.
Yep.
That sounds like what your book is more about. Whereas some of my, the things that I like is I like playing with historical figures. And it's almost like those are the books that I'm usually drawn to. It almost feels like an Easter egg. Like I like it if Richard Nixon is a car salesman. It's weird. Yeah,
He'd probably make a good one.
Yeah, he probably would have been.
He
Yeah,
would
he
have
would.
been a good-
He'd probably make a lot of money doing it.
Oh, yeah.
He made a bunch of money playing poker as a soldier in World War II
Yeah.
because he was a master analyzing
But I
psychology.
think the way that I think about it, I know nobody else talks about it this way, but I almost see it as like Easter eggs in history. Like if you understand history, you understand like the history of the Zeppelin, and then you show it differently. That's really cool for people who really know about it, or somebody who really likes the history of presidents or something like that, and you show them in a different light. Like that can be that's really fun, and I think that different people find different aspects of that fun, and then some people are very stickler about certain things. It's like, no, you can't mess with that. But I don't know, like you can mess with anything.
It feels like it's kind of a spectrum, and on the left side of the spectrum, not left in ideological sense, but on one side of the spectrum, you have the secret history, and there's like a conspiracy to hide this thing, or nobody knows about it, but it's otherwise exactly the same as everything. And then on the far side, you have thousands of years of differences have resulted in this completely different modern world that if there are any vague similarities, it's just because there's some common origin for stuff, and then you can play with any point in between.
And really, further to the left, you just have historical fiction, right? It just
Yep.
blends into, it's just fiction that's about historical figures, and that you're not trying to like get away with any kind of conspiracy that supposedly is real. It's just
Yep.
a story.
Now, one thing about alternate history, the appeal is stronger if you're treating subjects that people are very familiar with. And that's, I wonder, I just wonder if you're anticipating or if you're working off of events that are familiar to people in the West. For example, like probably half the alternate histories that have ever been written are either the Nazis win World War II or the South wins the Civil War, right? And I'm just wondering if you've considered that.
Yeah, I have. And actually, one of the interesting things is that if you know about Byzantine history, to your point, a lot of people don't, you know that it's just a continuation of the Roman Empire. So when we write a lot of the teasers, we're like, the Roman Empire still exists and it's cyberpunk. But we also throw the word Byzantine in there sometimes as kind of a synonym there, because there are a lot of Byzantine folks who, follow my Twitter and everything, and there was like 2,000 of them commenting like, oh my God, I want to buy this. So that's also part of my target market. So most people are familiar with the Roman Empire, so they're going to see some parallels there.
Apparently, there are people who think about the Roman Empire every day.
Hi, that would be me.
I
Yes,
read that somewhere.
yes, exactly.
So that is actually really smart. Yeah.
And when you point out to those that don't, that the Byzantines were actually part of the Roman Empire, you collect a lot of the rest.
Exactly. And then on top of that, Travis brought up, because he's the co-author on this universe that we're writing, he brought up that he had a Russian translation done of one of his books, and it was actually pretty successful. And he's like, okay, we need to get every Slavic translation of this book out there, because this is one book that those people are going to eat up like nothing.
That's true.
Because the Byzantines may not be very familiar in the West, but they are absolutely the core of reality to the Orthodox world. So we'll sell to them too, and hey, at least I hope so.
Well, let's take a moment and I'll run through our panelists here on what are their favorite or best examples of secret and or alternate history. Someone like to lead us off?
Tim Powers, I think, is the hero of secret history.
Yeah.
And the key there is that he does his research exhaustively so that you cannot find any document from true history that would contradict, that would prove anything that he does. And he uses the phrase, the paranoid squint. He's looking for odd, unexplained facts in history, and then he'll invent the explanation.
Right.
He'll start saying, okay, you're telling me Lord Byron was spotted on the streets of London by several people on a certain month in a certain year, when history knows that he was actually in the Eastern Mediterranean. So historians, because they don't know the whole story, just assume those people made a mistake. But Tim Power says, no, I think I know what really happened, and it had something to do with time-traveling ancient Egyptian magicians. And so, yeah, Tim Powers is one of my literary heroes.
I'll go with S.M. Sterling's Islands in the Sea of Time series. Excellent series. The people of Nantucket are like engulfed by a globe of energy and sucked back to something like 1500 BC-ish. And then they just show up exactly where they were, and they have to survive. And they make contact with the Bronze Age civilizations around the Mediterranean, and shenanigans ensue. They use a lot of real historical characters, like Odysseus is one of the figures in there. The King of Troy, he winds up dead, and not too many spoilers, but he winds up dead. You've got some of the Babylonians in the mix, some of the Egyptians in the mix, and I just thought it was really interesting because it scratched two itches that I like in a book. I love hearing about like tech reconstruction. So like, these guys have to build a tech base off of whatever the hell was on Nantucket Island, and That's like they've got some Jeep Cherokees laying around, and they build like little tanks out of them. They have machine shops where they're spinning lathes to make other lathes to make guns and cannons and stuff like that, steam engines and all that. And they're trying to reconstruct a tech base out of this. At the same time, they're interacting with all these historical figures, and all kinds of crazy shit happens. So I thought it was really fun. It's a way to play with, like you were saying, real historical figures and have some fun with it. And then, I love what can we do with our 21st century crap that we have just laying around on an island, and how can we keep our technology from regressing too much? It's just fun.
Well, Tim Powers was already said, so I don't know. I'm a big Philip Dick fan, so I like the Man in the High Castle, and the Connie Willis books, the Doomsday Book and the To Say Nothing of the Dog. I don't know if those are secret history or they're more secret history, I think.
Yeah, Man in the High Castle was what I was going to go with.
It's always tough to go toward.
Yeah,
the
I
end,
know. The other cliched answer is Harry Turtledove is a very good.
I almost
alternate
said
history.
Agents of Byzantium, because that was also a big inspiration, and it was a very hard choice between that and Islands of the Sea of Time. So Agent of Byzantium is one of Harry Turtledove's books.
Yeah.
I wish his politics were better. I interacted with him on Twitter once, and I was monumentally disappointed.
Yeah.
In Guns of the South, he did something really interesting. Towards the end, the election of 1864 occurs in the North. By this time, the South has successfully seceded. Seceded, yeah. And so Lincoln runs again, but he's definitely an underdog, completely discredited. But it ends up being 4 major candidates. And Harry Turtledove decided who would win the election by dividing the electorate into different demographics, then deciding this group in this region is going to go 30% to Lincoln and 40% in. And then he just ran the numbers, and it was like election night for him. He did not know who would win that election until he had done the math. I thought that was kind of a brave choice.
I'll throw out a lot of the obvious ones have been stolen by my distinguished panelists, but one of the alternate histories I like that goes back to that idea of having to rebuild technology in the past is Leo Frankowski did a series, the Cross-Time Engineer. The premise is this Polish engineer stumbles into this old inn while he's hiking in the mountains of Poland and accidentally stumbles into a time travel historical surveillance society and gets transported back to medieval Poland 10 years before the Mongols are going to invade and kill everyone. So he has 10 years to bring Poland's military technology up to the level where it can resist the Mongol hordes. It's a very interesting book and very plausible in terms of the steps that he takes in order to rebuild the technology. So I really enjoyed reading that series. Let's talk, I mean, we already talked about how some points of historical divergence are really kind of overused, probably because people are very interested in them. The Civil War, the Confederacy wins the Civil War, the Nazis win World War II. What other points of divergence are there, not ones that you've used in your own story, but ones that you think would make for lesser well-known points of divergence that would make for a good alternate history?
I had an idea the other day that I mentioned on Twitter that I was kind of misunderstood as I made the point, and a lot of people made the same response over and over again. But the obvious one of the obvious choices is the Nazis win World War II, and my thought was, what if the Soviets won the Cold War, and then here we get back to what we were talking about earlier with things converging again. What if things are basically the same as they are now? So with all of the political and weirdness and stuff that's going on in the U.S. today, what if what if our history and us winning the Cold War and them winning the Cold War, they both end up in the same place, which is a kind of an anti alternate history. Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Even if the Archduke didn't get assassinated, World War One probably would have happened pretty soon thereafter anyway. Things like that.
Yeah, and to some extent you get it can start to feel like cheating if you don't really explain why that is. I mean, if why there isn't some kind of it starts to feel like there's it's a Deus Ex Machina kind of thing where it's like there's this had to happen, or like in the Stephen King book about the JFK assassination, where he's preventing it. He's trying to change history, and then he keeps, like a tree falls in front of his car or whatever, and it's like, if history was going to try to stop you, I think you could do a little better than a tree. I mean, I enjoyed that book, but it was like, just he died of a heart attack. Like, there's easier ways that like history could reassert itself, and it's you have this sort of like anthropomorphized hand coming down from a cloud and saying. And it feels a little gimmicky because it's very arbitrary what it can and can't do, and if you I'll leave it at that. There was a hand up.
Yeah, Steve. I am not familiar with.
Yeah, I keep being told to read the books, but I'm not familiar with them.
Any other points of departure that anyone wants to share?
Yeah, and this will surprise exactly nobody because Roman Byzantine history is my thing. There are 2 points in Roman history that I've considered writing, and I haven't done it, but I thought they'd be really interesting. And the first one spares the West Roman Empire from falling. During the reign of Emperor Majorian, Majorian inherited the empire, and it was basically Italy and a couple of cities in Gaul or France. And the empire was about to completely fall. Majorian had balls that you needed a wheelbarrow to carry, because with this nothingness, he's like, I'm going to reconquer the entire Western Empire basically by myself. And he succeeds very quickly. He reconquers half of Gaul, all of Spain, all of Burgundy. Even the Visigoths are like, fuck. They bend the knee and are like, okay, we'll be part of the Roman Empire now. And he's looking like he's going to restore the entire Western Empire. And then he turns his attention to the Vandals. And the Vandals are sitting around in Carthage, so he needs a fleet. So he basically empties the entire treasury of what's left of the empire and builds a massive, retarded, ridiculous fleet. And he's like, I'm gonna go to the Vandals and I'm gonna mess them up. The Vandals get freaking scared because this fleet's like 3 times the size of theirs, and Majorian has like kicked everyone's ass up until now. But then a saboteur of some kind comes in and burns the whole fleet, sets the whole fleet on fire. And after that, Ricimer, the Germanic general that was under him and was like his childhood best friend, stabs him in the back and murders him and kills him. And there goes the restoration of the Western Empire. And within 15 years, it was gone. So the point of departure there, which I think would be fun to play with, is the guy who sets the ship on fire, maybe a guard notices him and stabs him in the face or something, and those ships sail to Carthage, and Majorian succeeds and restores the entire Western Empire in 3 years. It was that close to succeeding, and it's like one guy could have been killed and been done with it. So I thought that would be a fun one. The second one was when Belisarius reconquers Italy and is laying siege in Ravenna to the last of the Ostrogoth resistance. And the Ostrogoths come to him and say, you know what? we'll make you emperor of the West, and with us, you can conquer the rest of the Western Empire. And Belisarius, for historical reasons we don't know, turned down the offer and was eventually recalled by Justinian, and then the peninsula went to shit and basically didn't recover for 1,300 years. So, yeah, what if Belisarius said yes?
Anyone else have a point of departure to share?
Historians have observed that the American Republic got off to a great start, in part because some of the key leaders, particularly George Washington, did not produce an obvious male heir. So let's imagine a world where both Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, did I say that right earlier? George Washington. But in any case, those two produced sons, and those two started an American Civil War. Maybe there's a monarchy even. George the First and George the Second, and then Thomas the Second launches a civil war against George the Second. Anyone can have that idea if they want it.
I've thought about that since I think in terms of like just in general points of departure, like we're usually drawn to those big moments in history, and that's kind of part of how we understand history is these big moments. And finding those small moments, I think, that lead to the big moments are like the gems that.
Yeah,
but I don't have one in particular.
That's the real fun, I think.
Yeah.
In alternate secret history, finding those. The one that I really like, in fact, Lowell was reminding me of. I wrote this into a short story in my hidden truth secret history background. It turns out that when Nikola Tesla died, J. Edgar Hoover sent a bunch of agents over to secure all of his papers to make sure there wasn't any secret dangerous technologies relevant to the war effort. And the chief technical advisor was a very brilliant physicist named John Trump, who was Donald Trump's uncle. So the part of the hidden truth backstory secret history involves Tesla having been involved in the battle against the evil conspiracy that I describe in the hidden truth, and Donald Trump has the receipts.
Oh my God.
So if once I finish my next hidden truth novel, I'll be going and exploring some of the backstory of the hidden truth, talking about the battle that Tesla fought in the 1890s against the evil cabal. Yeah. Yeah, that's a definite time travel, but then from that point of departure, I don't know. You could either play the Rob's game of well, yes, the Connecticut Yankee went back and they were so horrified with the steam engines and gunpowder that they destroyed all mentions of them and led to our current timeline, or you could have a whole divergent timeline of Arthurian knights, riding their main battle tanks and their jet fighters into combat in a few centuries later.
Yeah, I was thinking about time travel stories in relation to alternate history, and although I don't know that anybody categorizes it this way, but I think you could think about time travel is alternate history where the divergent point is somebody goes back in time, and that's the thing that is the diverging point in which. And you can think of Back to the Future, right? You had the famous Doc Brown scene where he's like, well, this is the alternate 1985, and that, so in some ways time travel stories that travel back to the past are kind of alternate history.
Yep.
Yeah. Right.
So I have a question, Hans, on that, and actually, I guess for anyone. There's a book called The Excalibur Alternative. Has anyone here read that?
Yes, I have.
That one is fascinating to me because is it a secret history? Because aliens come and kidnap a bunch of Englishmen in around the year 1300, I believe, and they use it to fight enemies that are low tech. 'Cause they subscribe to the aliens subscribe to some kind of rule that if you're going to conquer a planet, you have to use soldiers of the same technological level to make it fair. So they're like, oh, these Englishmen are really good for, like, Iron Age kind of people, so we'll take them, and they do that. And all of this is going on, whereas the history of Earth keeps going the way that it is, and then at the end, the descendants of these meet the descendants of Earth. Does that count as like a secret history? I mean, how do we figure that one in there?
That one I think is hard to classify because nothing in Earth's history, I mean, it's a secret history in the sense that nothing in our known history is being contradicted and we're on the same timeline. And there's only a reconvergence in the distant future. Like in that one, some of the aliens who have employed these human mercenaries come to conquer Earth, but the Excalibur alternative mercenaries who were stolen away have in the meantime developed their own human super advanced spacefaring technology and come to save Earth from the alien invasion. So I don't think that can be categorized neatly as a secret or alternate history. And of course, that's part of the who was that? David Drake, Ranks of Bronze.
Oh yeah, the Roman one.
The original. Well, I think now Bain was that was one of the books I looked at for possible inclusion, but it's too expensive in the sale, and I think that's now being marketed as the third book in the David Drake Ranks of Bronze series or something along those lines.
Gotcha, makes sense.
I'm not as familiar with Janissaries, but it's the basic concept is aliens kidnap human mercenaries. So, Bob.
Yeah.
One resource I want to recommend, I was on a Geek Gab with Daddy Warpig back a few years ago, talking with him about the hidden truth and the secret and alternate histories involved. And he said, well, have you read GURPS Timeline? I said, what? He said, GURPS Timeline. You do alternate history and you're not familiar with GURPS Timeline? This is a publication of Steve Jackson Games, and it's designed for making alternate history role-playing games. And what he's done is he's got, goodness, like 128 pages of a detailed historical outline with events that are suitable for picking to be a divergence point in a timeline. So if you want to if you're interested in exploring it, you can pick up a used copy of this and just go through and turn to a random page and decide that you're going to change the death of Charles the Fat and the Arabs occupying Provence.
Here we go. Byzantine Empire extended to the Euphrates and Tigris in 919.
Yeah. So
That is actually legitimate. That almost happened.
So there you go.
oh, I'm not familiar with those. I was not familiar with them, so thank you for bringing those to my attention. Well, I think we're running short of time. If we want to get started at 9 o'clock, why don't we take well first around? Oh, one last question. I think that kind of depends. I mean, there's the great man theory of history where the events of the great leader or the great influencer are what drive events. That's very easy to turn into butterfly effect and things go differently because the someone lost the battle plans at Antietam and the battle was lost, but oops, then someone says pick them up. I mean, you can have individual events like that. And then, of course, the convergence is where you're looking more at events that arise from broad-scale social factors that are probably going to be pretty much the same no matter what specific details happen.
It also relates to what I was saying earlier, which is if you start thinking in terms of something wanting history to go a particular way, like if things want to converge, toward a particular point, or events that need to happen, then you start anthropomorphizing this historical force, and then maybe you're actually thinking of it as God wanting the history to happen or its particular events to happen. But this happens. I've worked with this a little bit, like you get in that Stephen King book, whatever the date is, the 11/22/63 or whatever, where you get a sense that there's like this force that wants things to happen or not to happen, and I work with that a little bit in the Iron Dragon books, where there's sort of an anthropomorphizing, and of course it's Vikings, and then one of the characters sort of cheekily names this force Loki, which is the limits of known information. So they cannot contradict. They know if they try to do something that contradicts the historical record, they will fail, and probably catastrophically. So they are always working, because the characters have gone back in time, so they know, and they have access to the historical record, so they know what's going to happen, and they know they can't undo that, and so they're always trying to go, okay, well, we can't kill this guy because we know he doesn't get killed, so we have to do something else.